Uh, For those in the room, if you can't hear me, it's okay to come closer, even if you need to bring a chair and come closer so you can hear me. There's a little bit of background noise in the space here that affects us, but it might not affect you very much because of the nature of microphones. Today, we are discussing the Vāseṭṭha Sutta, which is about different kinds of beings. And I am looking at the sutta in a particular angle because I'm thinking about kamma, not kamma, which is sensual desire, but kamma, which is the intentional deeds we do by body, speech, or mind that have ethical qualities resulting in either bringing about happiness for oneself and others or bringing about dukkha, suffering for oneself and others. It is said that the practice of the Brahma Viharas can deeply cover or reduce the impact of one's previous kamma. So even a person who's committed unskillful deeds in the past, if they practice the Brahma Viharas, they may be able to be reborn in the Brahma realm, or they may have the way opened to them to obtain noble attainments. Before I get into today's sutta, I'm going to read you just one sentence. This is from the Madhyama Agama version of the Karajakaya Sutta, the sutta on the mind-made body. So the person who is practicing according to the boundless radiation of the Brahma Viharas, it says that learned and noble disciple, so that's somebody who has stream entry already, they would reflect like this: formerly, my mind was narrow and not well developed. Now my mind has become boundless and well developed. When the mind of the learned noble disciple has in this way become boundless and well developed, if because of associating with bad friends, one formerly dwelt in negligence and performed unwholesome deeds, those deeds cannot lead one along, cannot defile one, and will not come back to meet one. So what has been done in the past will in some way come to fruition, but the way this happens depends on what one does now. So now, just having put out this theory or this premise, now we can look at the sutta and see how the sutta might be relevant to that idea. Okay, here we go. This beginning of this sutta also appears, exactly the same sutta appears in the Sutta Nipata, which is a different collection. The Sutta Nipata is in quite a different style than many of the suttas that we see, like in the middle length discourses or in the other main groups of discourses. And this one also has a kind of a fresh and different poetic style, which makes it unusual for the middle length discourses. And then the second or the last third of this sutta also appears as the last book of the Dhammapada. Okay, so yeah, we see this in other places. The Buddha was staying in a forest near Ichanangala. Now, some very well-to-do Brahmins were residing there. They included Chanki, Taruka, Pukkarasati, Janusoni, Todeya, and others. These were very famous and well-accomplished Brahmin teachers, really super famous, top quality teachers. So these two students, Vāseṭṭha and Bharadvaja, were going for a walk, and they began to discuss before this question: how do you become a Brahmin? Bharadvaja said, when you're well born on both your mother's and father's side, of pure descent, with irrefutable and impeccable genealogy, back to the seventh paternal generation, you're a Brahmin. Vāseṭṭha said, when you're ethical and accomplished in doing your duties, then you're a Brahmin. This teaching, with these very two same Brahmins having the discussion, there's another very famous sutta in the long discourses called the Aggañña Sutta, which is kind of a humorous mythology about the evolution of the world. Aggañña means what came first, and it's this very same two monks who are having exactly the same debate with each other. And so the Buddha is, and then in this Aggañña Sutta, it also gives a very similar kind of teaching about the different classes, the different castes of people, aristocrats, Brahmins, peasants, and animals, and whether or not that depends on birth or on behavior. I might circle back to that again after this. So they're having this debate. Neither is able to persuade the other. Vāseṭṭha said, well, the ascetic Gautama, the Sakyan, gone forth from a Sakyan family, is staying in the forest near Ichanangala. He has this good reputation. That blessed one is perfectly awakened, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy, knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened and blessed. This is the classic definition when we recall the Buddha. Come, let's go see him and ask him about the matter. As he answers, I will remember it. So they go, they exchange greetings, they sit down to one side, and they address the Buddha in verse. We're both authorized masters of the three Vedas. I'm a student of Pukkarasati, and he of Taruka. We're fully qualified in all the Vedic experts teach as philologists and grammarians. We match our tutors in recitation. We have a dispute regarding genealogy. For Bharadvaja says that one is a Brahmin due to birth, but I declare it's because of one's deeds. And then deeds here is kamuna, or same thing as kamma. Oh, clear-eyed one, no, this is our debate. Since neither of us was able to convince the other, we've come to ask you, sir, renowned and awakened one. As people join with joined palms, the moon on the cusp of waxing, bowing, they revere Gautama in the world. We ask this of Gautama. The I, arisen in the world, is one a Brahmin due to birth or else because of deeds? We don't know, so please tell us. How can we recognize a Brahmin? I shall explain to you, said the Buddha. Accurately and in sequence, the taxonomy of living creatures, for species are indeed diverse. Know the grass and trees. Though they lack self-awareness, they're defined by birth, for species are indeed diverse. The distinction I'm hoping to draw out of this is the kamma, the past kamma, the past causes and conditions that cause birth. So the most important fruit, almost the most important fruit that we experience in our whole lifetime is not whether we're one color or a different color, or whether we have good luck or bad luck, but merely the fact of how we were born. Um, um, so grass and trees and plants are defined by birth. Next are the bugs and moths and so on to ants and termites. They're defined by birth, for species are indeed diverse. Know the quadrupeds too, both small and large. They are defined by birth, for species are indeed diverse. Know too the long-backed snakes crawling on their bellies. They are defined by birth, for species are indeed diverse. Next, know the fish whose range is in water. They are defined by birth, for species are indeed diverse. Next, know the birds, winged chariots in flight. They are defined by birth, for species are indeed diverse. So far, the Buddha is politely agreeing with the idea that kamma, or that one's status is defined by birth, at least respect to these animal species. And it is argued here that fishes, birds, and animals and insects don't have very much opportunity to make intentional choices apart from what's programmed into them. When they took birth at that species, they've got a whole lot of instincts and patterns, and relatively little opportunity to break out of it. Now, others might think that animals can be good. Even we've seen so many examples of kindness between animals, and even animals who are kind not only to their own species, but they can be kind and loving towards other species as well. They can exhibit bravery, and animals can have all kinds of emotions, and yet nevertheless in this format of this poem, the animals are described in terms of being defined by birth. While the differences between these species are defined by birth, the differences between humans are not defined by birth, not by hair, nor by head, not by ear, nor by eye, not by mouth, nor by nose, not by lips, nor by eyebrow, not by shoulder, nor by neck, not by belly, nor by back, not by buttocks, nor by breast, not by groin, nor by genitals, not by hands, nor by feet, not by fingers, nor by nails, not by knees, nor by thighs, not by color, nor by voice. None of these are defined by birth, as it is for the other species. In individual human bodies, you can't find such distinctions, though distinctions among humans are spoken of by convention. We know that in the past, in historical times, they felt there was such profound differences among the different races of humans that they treated them almost as if the outsiders were not really human. Uh, and we know that even today, there's a school of thinking that claims that the wealthiest and the most highly privileged people in the world are there because they are innately better than the poor and oppressed, thinking that poor people have a lot of bad qualities that causes them to receive their poor condition, and imagining that they somehow earned the privilege that they have. So this teaching is, in modern times, very widely quoted and used as to combat racism, and are indeed to compare modern racism the way that the ancient people thought about the caste system, or at the Buddhist time, it wasn't a fully developed caste system, but it was something similar to the, but more simple than the fully developed caste system, where they felt that the people were defined by the status that they were born into, and that they had the fate to live out their lifetime on the same pattern as their immediate family. Um, but for humans, we now come to moving from the fruit of the old kamma, which caused us to be born, with the kind of body that we have, to the idea of the present kamma, which in this poem is represented by the kind of work we do, the kind of activities we do. The distinctions among humans are spoken by convention. Anyone among humans who lives off keeping cattle, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a farmer, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who lives off various professions, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a professional, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who lives off trade, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a trader, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who lives off serving others, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a servant, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who lives off stealing, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a bandit, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who lives off archery, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a soldier, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who lives off priesthood, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a sacrificer, not a Brahmin. Anyone among humans who taxes village and nation, know them, Vāseṭṭha, as a ruler, not a Brahmin. I don't call someone a Brahmin after the mother's womb they're born from, if they still have attachments. Okay, so now the Buddha is moving to a third level of kamma, which is the person who is no longer creating the type of kamma that's going to lead them on to another rebirth. But instead, they have done what brings them to the end of rebirth. And what they manifest with their body, speech, and mind are the behaviors of one who is in their last lifetime. In one of the other suttas, it speaks about that the past kamma will entirely come to its fruition and be experienced within the span of one lifetime. And that is a kind of in the Karajikaya Sutta, that's a kind of a confusing statement. I've read some of the writings and discussions and debates about that sutta, and it seems to be, they say this is not really a Buddhist teaching, it's a Jain teaching or something like that. But I think that this sutta is talking about one who's enlightened, who's not coming to birth again. And this is something interesting to ponder about how whatever karma is left over can be complete within one lifetime. I don't call someone a Brahmin after their mother's womb they were born from, if they still have attachments. They're just someone who says, "Whoa," that's a term of address, Mr. They're just called Mr. Having nothing, taking nothing, that's who I call a Brahmin. Having cut off all fetters, they have no anxiety. They've slipped their chains. They are detached. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've cut the strap and harness, the reins and bridle too. with crossbar lifted, they're awakened. That's who I call a Brahmin. I just want to pause here for a minute and see that we really understand that having nothing and taking nothing, that's a person who's gone beyond me and mine. They've gone completely beyond the delusion about the self. They've gone completely beyond greed. Having cut off the fetters is a reference to the 10 fetters that would keep a person going around in the cycle of rebirth. So one who has cut all the 10 fetters is one who is a fully awakened arahant. Having slipped their chains, cut the strap and harness. So in some ways, trying to draw the analogy with kamma, I'm wondering if we can say that these fetters are the harness. You know, what is the harness? The harness is our habitual ways of thinking and reacting, the way that we kind of compulsively repeat doing the same thing again. It's sort of like I think Bhikkhu Bodhi says that part of his explanation of kamma is that when one does an intentional action, it sets off a kind of like a reverberation within the mind that has a tendency to keep going on in the same direction. And so then one who's committed a negative kamma could be perhaps like say a violent criminal who does some kind of assault or even a murder, and they get caught and punished and put in a jail for a period of time. So they've already, within this lifetime, they've experienced the immediate result of the kamma they did, in a sense of experiencing some kind of punishment. But if they haven't found out how to purify the mind, that the mind itself could keep on reverberating or echoing or repeating in that same negative groove that is what took them to do the unwholesome karma in the first place. And so then after they, they get pardoned and they get let out and they feel very happy, but then within a couple of days or weeks, they lose their temper and commit some similar kind of deed again because they've not really taken care of the karma that they did just by having experienced some result of the karma, because they haven't found out how to purify the mind or how to change the mind. They haven't found out how to let go, and so this is a question that maybe I'd like to ask now is, can you see how how you as a human make choices, and every choice that you make is creating a kamma, and the kamma that you create has its results, or you could say what you experience, can you sometimes clearly see that this is fruition that is coming back to me because of something that I can clearly see the connection, something I did or I didn't do, or that my mind was pure, it wasn't pure, and then because of that, these results are coming forth. But then, once you see that, then how is it possible to change our mind and to stop one pattern and cross over into a different pattern. Why is it that we're not trapped like somebody in the ancient times, and their father was a butcher, and their grandfather was a butcher, and their great-grandfather was a butcher going back 7 generations, and so then they have to be a butcher. And they have to be a butcher for their whole life, and their children have to also. And so this is like thinking of like the kamma is something that's inescapable, that's not changeable. And yet we think it is changeable. We think that as humans, it is possible to make a choice to go in a different direction. So what do you think? I see a message. What translation version are you using? Thank you. I'm using Bhante Sujato's translation. When I sent you the link in the email, I gave a different translation, and the reason I did that was Bhante Sujato's translation was temporarily dysfunctional. And I reported it to Sutta Central, and they fixed it. So that's the one I'm now in, is the Sujata version and not the other version. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. So Buddha says that it's volition that he calls kamma.
Right.
So because one can attain vijja, what I call complete knowledge, as opposed to avijja, incomplete knowledge, once having gained that, one can change their volition because their mind is now changed, because their knowledge is now more complete. So that process starts with the very beginning. Buddha says that among common men, there are those who don't accept, that there are other worlds and things like that, and higher things. So they're in complete avijja. But you begin to get a little bit of avijja if you start having your mind attracted to those type of ideas. You don't necessarily have proof of those things initially, but it makes more sense, more logical sense. And Buddha says that without that minimal understanding, you can't really understand his teachings. So his teachings are really built on those, 7 or 8 hypotheses, you might call it, in a modern term. And but with the attainment of Sotapan, a radical change happens in the mind, where it becomes totally clear to you that the Buddha is the enlightened one who's actually teaching the true complete teaching, and from that point, you can't turn back at all. You're irrevocably moving forward, and you just keep moving forward in that way. So it's not necessarily easy to change the mind, because our mind is so full of all this avijja, incomplete knowledge. But if one gets an insight and sees, certain things, the mind can begin to change. And if it gets further enough along that it comes to understand, gets right understanding, which leads to right view, then the mind radically changes, and you can't go back from that. And then you keep developing yourself more and more. And Buddha says that the last 3 parts of the path, how quickly one goes through those is dependent upon how thoroughly they've attained the first 5 levels of the path. So that's why we see in the Buddha's time, we see many people coming to the Buddha, and maybe just in one discussion with the Buddha, if they're already at the level of Sotapan, although there is a sutra where someone becomes a Sotapan, and by the end of the sutra, they become an Arahant. So they can just, because they're so highly developed in this earlier part of the path, their mind can quickly traverse through these later sequences. But as time went on, Buddha was kind of getting the cream of the crop, you might say, and he really gathered all those people up. And then people who came later were a little slower to move along. So
yeah.
But it's the same principle. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for listening.
I'm glad you mentioned Vijab because it is something that's very true, and we see this all the time. If a person does not see reality the way it is accurately, then no amount of willpower and no amount of social change might get them to be able to change their behavior. Even though they make a resolution every New Year's, they make a resolution to lose weight, but if they don't see the value in it, or if they don't see the dukkha in it, or if they don't understand why, just making a resolution does not result in change. But insight is where the real transformation comes. And now I'll call on Anaya.
Well, okay, it worked. Well, I agree with Richard, of course, because he's laying out the Buddhist principles of how one gains insight. I was going to say a few words about how, on a more mundane, or what are the steps leading to that? How do you gain that in a kind of a day-to-day sense? Is that human beings, generally speaking, seem to make change when things are really, really not going well. Something is really is just not adding up. Your life is in the toilet. Things around you are not going well. Your circumstances may be dire. And something within the person, this could be the result of kamma, says, okay, I really have got, this is like a very driven inner thing that says, I've got to make a change. Mm-hmm. And so we see examples of people who have addiction problems, and they finally, the classic 12-step, reach the bottom and then make a change and start looking for some other source of guidance rather than their deluded mind. They come to realize that their thinking is really seriously deluded. So those programs help, and certainly doing psychotherapy can help too, and getting through the neuroses of everyday life. And then once you get through that layer, and there's still something that isn't quite adding up, the search begins, or one looks for a spiritual sense, a sense of development in another way that goes beyond just the mundane choices, making, okay, I made this change. That works better, but I'm really still not feeling that great. So, and one can go through various iterations of seeking and searching. And if one is led to Buddhism, which I believe one is led to Buddhism, there's like experiences where one looks at various aspects of religions, spiritual organizations, whatever. And the Buddhist teaching resonates and says, okay, now this is really the truth. I get that this is the way that this change is going to take place for me. And then, of course, developing through practice after that. So, and I have to say for myself, that's kind of the path that happened for me. I didn't come from completely dire circumstances as a child, but my father did become an alcoholic, and it definitely was a problem and affected the family, growing up. And when I had my own family, then all of the delusions and the craziness begins to play out in another layer, and you start looking at like, oh, this is really not okay, and begin to look for ways to make change. So I offer that.
Thank you. I would add that even within this path of practice, what we have been seeing presented to us is that, in particular, these immeasurable meditations, the practice of the Brahma Viharas in the style of boundless radiation, is especially powerful and effective in wiping out whatever residual underlying tendency a person might have towards a negative pattern. So if someone has got underlying mentality that's inclining towards greed, or an underlying mentality that's inclining towards anger, that then it seems to be really giving a very clear and strong prescription that this practice is the practice to unwind and eliminate that underlying tendency. And when one is safe from some unwholesome inner defilements, or the tendency or the readiness towards some unwholesome defilements, then it seems to me that in order to gain the further levels of insight, it requires a mind which is very relaxed, very still, really clear, that's very open to subtle things, that's very flexible. And so if you suppose you had a mind that's has a tendency towards hatred, and you're trying to, you control your inner hatred. And so then one would be constantly sort of internally suppressing hateful thoughts from arising. And that's putting the mind in a position that is tense, rigid, not completely open. And that's not really the good position to be in, to allow insight to arise. And so then this is my theory at the moment. I'm practicing this way because I think it's going to work. That practicing the Brahma Viharas and striving towards the boundless or immeasurable style of meditation is what's going to get out of that position of still being somewhat like a beset, and like I've been thinking about, for some reason, different conversations are taking me to my old Catholic backgrounds. There's something called the Hound of Heaven. Does anybody know what that is? Well, it's some kind of a poem or a metaphor or story, something like that. So I feel like I'm being chased by the Hound of Heaven, like I was running away from my bad habits, and in this continuous struggle or something like that. And so it's such a relief, so great in meditation to gain a real rest from that kind of pressure, to be able to fully relax and fully open up, because that pressure is not there while the mind is in that boundless state. I see Venerable Maharajan is smiling. Can you add something?
The sutta, the conch blower, comes to mind. And in that sutta, there's an additional description where the Buddha says, if you think you're going to go to hell for what you've done, you will surely be dragged there on your deathbed. And so he gives the Brahma Viharas as the practice that this is a restorative justice, sort of, in the Buddha's teaching, that you've done bad things. The Buddha says this is bad, don't do that. So you stop and you cover that with the Brahma Viharas.
Right. Thank you. somebody asked to define the Brahmaviharas. That is the practice of radiating in a boundless way in all directions, without any distinctions. The thought of loving kindness, which is intending for the happiness of all beings. The thought of compassion, with the intention for all beings to come to the end of dukkha. With the thought of sympathetic joy, with the thought for all beings without exception in all directions, without any limits, to keep the gains of what they've realized, and with that wonderful mind in the middle aspect of equanimity, which is neither pulled by aversion or pulled by greed, but is able to stay clear, collected, and to see things as they really are, seeing the mistakes, seeing the disease, seeing the success, seeing the wellness, and just seeing in all of it with a level-headed mind. Marajana, do you remember the name or the book or the number of the sutta you just quoted?
It's the conch blower.
Okay. Is it in the middle length?
I think it's in the middle length. 171 comes to mind, but who knows?
Okay, thank you. Let's go back and read a little bit further in this sutta. Oh, yes. This is Seminary Dhamma speaking.
Thank you, Ayya. You mentioned can as human being, unlike other species, right? We can change. Birth does not define us. What came to mind is in our current time, there's three things that came to mind. Like people in class, went to India multiple times and spoke to people. How even though they're born in a particular class, even though they have their mind, but their name actually has their the class that they're in. And if they go anywhere, people know where they're from, and other different class would not take them. So they're stuck, even though they try to, but the society won't let them move. That's one. The other thing here, like a society kind of suppress them to believe, to behave in a certain way, and they have to believe it, and no other knowledge given to them to be able to explore and see other way. Without that, they couldn't move. Okay. The other thing is in like a society where they are bound, and if they try to escape, they're at risk. Yeah. Like, for example, in, like a woman, and I'm going to mention Burma. If a woman want to ordain, because the families will forceful, maybe, just own them, that kind of stuff. So that this external force can really hold you down. So even though we're not defined by birth. That's all I just want to add.
Coming back again about the Brahmaviharas, the practice of metta, or loving kindness, is the first one of the four Brahmaviharas. We very often see the practice of metta all by itself, and we see then the other three within the set of four, which is called the divine abidings. And it has that name because one of the characteristics of someone who practices that way, developing the boundless meditation with those four ideas of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, if they do not obtain enlightenment, they may be reborn in the heavenly realm, the Brahma realm. So that's the meaning of that. Here's the quote for the conch blower. It's number 42.8 in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses.
Very sorry, I was very wrong.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep reading. Oh, I love saying the crossbar is lifted. that's that metaphor. So the crossbar, is like it's the toll gate, or it would be something. It's said in the commentary to refer to the 5 hindrances that are blocking you from being able to get into meditation. But it's something, or you could say that Mara, or the evil one, is trying to block people from getting out of this worldly level. Um, and so that's a very beautiful, and then there's another sutra, the simile of the snake, that has that same simile about the crossbar. And then they also have one, which a different simile that I like very much about enlightenment, and that is they've put down their flag. So if you imagine like being on a march and you're the person who's carrying the flag, and you've marched 20 miles, and you got this great banner with this heavy pole and this big flag, and you got to keep it upright, and you've been carrying it and carrying it and carrying it for so many miles, and then you come to the end of the journey, and then you can put it down. And so the flag would be like all of our identity, our pride, our conceit, all of our, ideas that we've got to keep up any type of a false front about, what kind of person we are, or trying to live up to social expectations, because we're trying to belong to a certain class. And so we have to behave ourselves according to how the people in that class behave themselves. And so that's all of that is like the false flag. It's not the banner of that one. It's the flag that we're wearing. But the and it's really tiresome. And so how great it is to put down that flag. So they have slipped the chains. They've cut the strap and harness, the reins and bridle, with the crossbar lifted. They're awakened. That's who I call a Brahmin. And now the rest of their behavior. Okay, Richard.
Thank you. I see the crossbar as, in the old days, simple doors, they would have a bar holding it shut. So when you lift the crossbar, you open the door, and what have you done? You've opened the door to the deathless.
Right.
And in Majjhima Nikaya, it says, Bhikkhu. This bhikkhu is called one whose crossbar has been lifted, whose trench has been filled, etc., etc. I'll go down. And how is the bhikkhu one whose crossbar has been lifted? Here the bhikkhu has abandoned ignorance, has cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stone, done away with it, so that it's no longer subject to future arising. This is how the bhikkhu is one whose crossbar has been lifted.
Thank you.
Anyway, I just thought that might be interesting.
Good. Thank you very much. I love the way the people in this class are now helping. We're pulling together as a team to make the class even more rich and wonderful. How they behave: abuse, killing, caging. They endure these without anger. See, they have that quality of patience. Patience is their powerful army. That's who I call a Brahmin. I'm going to call on Maureen now.
I'm looking at that. I'm using the Nanamoli Bhikkhu Bodhi translation, and it talks about the reins and bridle band and whose shaft is lifted. And I thought the shaft was the burden that attached you, whose shaft is lifted from the burden that you're pulling. I don't know that, and that's not the same sort of translation that you've got.
Okay, well, maybe it has many meanings.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I've interrupted.
Okay, thank you. So patience is their powerful army. That's who I call a Brahmin. Not irritable or pretentious. Dutiful in precepts and observances. Tamed. Bearing their final body. That's who I call a Brahmin. Like a rain off a lotus leaf, like a mustard seed off the point of a pin. Sensual pleasures slip off them. That's who I call a Brahmin. What a wonderful metaphor that is. You know, the lotus leaf is so pure and so clean and beautiful, and dirt doesn't stick to it, and the rain doesn't stick to it. It just sits up on the surface without soaking into it. They understand for themselves the end of suffering in this life with the burden put down, detached. That's who I call the Brahmin. Deep in wisdom, intelligent, expert in what is the path and what is not the path. Arrived at the highest goal. That's who I call the Brahmin. Mixing with neither householders nor the homeless. A migrant with no shelter. Few in wishes. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've laid aside violence against creatures firm and frail, not killing or making others kill. That's who I call a Brahmin. Not fighting among those who fight, quenched among those who are armed, not grasping among those who grasp. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've discarded greed and hate, along with conceit and contempt, like a mustard seed off the point of a pin. That's who I call a Brahmin. The words they utter are sweet, informative, and true. They don't offend anyone. That's who I call a Brahmin. They don't steal anything in the world, long or short, fine or coarse, beautiful or ugly. That's who I call a Brahmin. They have no hope for this world or the next, with no need for hope, detached. That's who I call a Brahmin. And Bhante Sujata wants to emphasize that asa is really does mean hope or longing for something. And in other religions, hope is considered a desirable thing, a virtue. But you don't see this given in Buddhism as a virtue, longing for something in the future. We're supposed to be mindful in the present moment. They have no clinging. Knowledge has freed them of indecision. They've arrived at the culmination of freedom from death. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've escaped the snare of both good and bad deeds. Sorrowless, stainless, pure. That's who I call a Brahmin. This is punya and papa. So doing merits and doing demerits is completely escaped. Pure as the spotless moon, clear and undisturbed. They've ended relish for rebirth. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've got past this grueling swamp of delusion and transmigration. Meditating in stillness, free of indecision, they crossed over to the far shore. They're quenched by not grasping. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've given up sensual stimulations. They've gone forth from lay life. They've ended rebirth in the sensual realm. That's who I call a Brahmin. But this verse seems to be describing a fully enlightened arhat. So it's not only in the sensual realm that they've given up rebirth. Well, a person who's ended rebirth in the sensual realm could include a non-returner who is maybe reborn in a different realm of existence, not this kamma loka where we are, but in a different realm altogether. And then from there, go to their parinibbana. They've given up craving and have gone forth from lay life. They've ended craving to be reborn. That's who I call a Brahmin. They've thrown off the human yoke, slipped out of the heavenly yoke, unyoked from all yokes. That's who I call a Brahmin. So the heavenly yoke would be someone who is longing to be in heaven, who desires the existence in the Brahma realm and is attached to the existence in the Brahma realm. So some of the Brahma, some of the divinities in that realm are disciples of the Buddha who practice the Dhamma, who strive for awakening, and some of them are not disciples of the Buddha. They just love being in heaven, and they love how pleasant it is and how free of trouble, and how long-lived it is. But the Brahmin is one who slipped out of the heavenly yoke as well as off the human yoke. Giving up discontent and desire, they're cooled, free from attachments. A hero, master of the whole world. That's who I call a Brahmin. Okay, here's more of their vidya, their knowledge. They know the passing away and rebirth of all beings. Unattached, wholly awakened. That's who I call a Brahmin. Gods, centaurs, that would be Gandhabas, and humans. A Gandhaba is a type of, one of the types of beings, spiritual beings who still exist here on this kamma loka together with us in the world of sensual desire. So Bhante Sujata equates them to a centaur who is a magical creature but is still filled with lust and desire. Gods, centaurs, and humans don't know their destiny. The perfected ones with defilements ended. That's who I call a Brahmin. They have nothing before or after, or even in between. Having nothing, taking nothing, that's who I call a Brahmin. So having nothing before or after, they're not attached to the past and not attached to the future. As someone said a few minutes ago, if you did a bad deed in the past and you feel that you are destined for a punishment, you can have the punishment that you feel you deserve because of your past deeds. That's a kind of attachment to what happened before. But they don't have that, nor attachment to something to come, something wished for. Leader of the herd, excellent hero, great seer and victor, unstirred, washed, awakened. That's who I call a Brahmin. They who know their past lives see heaven and places of lost. They've attained the end of rebirth. That's who I call a Brahmin. For name and clan are formulated as mere conventions in the world, produced by mutual agreement. They're formulated for each individual. Now we're coming back to this conventional level of the different social positions and the different caste or different groups in society that are pinned down by status. For a long time, this misconception has prejudiced those who don't understand. Ignorant, they declare that one is Brahmin by birth. You're not a Brahmin by birth. By birth, a non-Brahmin. By Brahmin, you're a Brahmin by your deeds, and by deeds, a non-Brahmin. So You're a farmer by your deeds. By deeds, you're a professional. You're a seat trader by deeds. By deeds, you are a servant. You're a bandit by your deeds. By deeds, you're a soldier. You're a sacrificer by your deeds. By your deeds, you're a ruler. In this way, the astute regard deeds in accord with the truth. So these kind of deeds are called kammas in this case. So these are the intentional actions epitomized by choosing different kinds of livelihood. Seeing, dependent origination. They're expert in deeds and their results. Deeds, meaning kammas, make the world go on. Deeds make people go on. Sentient beings are bound by deeds, like a moving chariot's linchpin. By fervor and spiritual practice, by restraint and self-control. That's how to become a Brahmin. This is the supreme Brahmin. Accomplished in the three knowledges, peaceful with rebirth ended. Know them then, Vāseṭṭha, as the divinity and Sakha to the wise. When he had spoken, Vāseṭṭha and Bharadvaja said, excellent, worthy Gautama, excellent, as if he were writing the overturned, revealing the hidden, pointing out the path or the lost, lighting the lamp in the dark, so people with clear eyes can see what's there. Worthy Gautama has made the teaching clear in many ways. We go to refuge to the Gautama, to the teaching, to the mendicant Sangha. From this day forth, my Gautama, remember us as lay followers who have gone for refuge for life. Sadhu, sadhu. So we can see deeds and their result by looking around, by one who has insight, who can see beings, how beings are reborn according to their deeds, how they live according to their deeds, how they have experiences according to their deeds. But then the one who is the Brahmin is not having all of these wonderful qualities by willpower. They're not somebody who's trying really, 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 really hard to act like a Brahmin. Instead, they're one who has realized the destruction of the fetters because of that purification of the mind, because of a transformation of their insight, of their wisdom, because they, having seen dukkha and the cause of dukkha, having abandoned the cause of dukkha, and having realized directly and personally the cessation that comes from abandoning those causes. Then afterwards, a person may go about in the world, and they will have those beautiful qualities of not fighting with anyone, not quarreling with anyone, being endlessly patient, being gentle, not killing, not harming, even just having the talent to be able to see the dukkha of beings around them, and to have the talent of not doing anything to increase the dukkha, to increase the suffering, or to cause harm or ill to anyone. Okay, Maureen, and then Richard.
Well, I'm a bit confused in that you can't be a householder and be a Brahmin. Is that what he's saying? I mean, because actions the enlightenment of is from, you can be that a householder and be enlightened. Brahmin, is this a way of encouraging the people who were in the Brahmin religion to become Buddhist followers? This whole future.
It could be. What he's done, as the Buddha very often does, is he takes a word that everybody knows what the meaning is, and then he redefines it and fills that concept with a completely different meaning. So in that system, the Brahmin class thought that they were the highest of all humans. And the Buddha is saying, no, the person who's the highest of all humans is the one who's enlightened, and who has these qualities that makes them so. Regardless of having been born from any caste or having any position in life. Now, whether somebody who's a fully enlightened arhat can be a householder, one idea would be that they would not be able to go to work and punch in a time clock and do their job, because it would just not be relevant anymore for them. They wouldn't be having sex with their spouse and making babies, because no longer relevant, no longer pertains. In the ancient times, it did happen sometimes, like on the deathbed, that one is like on the path to full awakening, and they immediately get themselves ordained, or even on their deathbed. But the other levels of enlightenment, there are numerous examples in the ancient suttas of persons who were householders, who did have wives and did have jobs and did have houses and did have cattle and all those other things, who were enlightened. So I hope that dispels the confusion about. So the Buddha has redefined Brahmin to have a completely different meaning. It doesn't mean people who belong to that group and were born into that group and are practicing with the status of that group. Calling on Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. Just to address the last comment, I don't think Buddha is saying here specifically that you have to have all of these qualities. He seems to be saying more that you have some, and you can see that in the end. You could have all, Buddha would have all of them. But in the end, when he talks about the herd's leader, perfected hero, the great seer whose victory is won, unperturbed, cleansed, awakened. I'm reading Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. He is the one I call a Brahmin. Well, Buddha is the herd leader. You know what I'm saying? So he's not saying he's the only Brahmin, but then other things seem to apply specifically to arahants. Other things seem to apply to people who have mastered the 5 precepts and things like, one who never steals or anything, And so, I wouldn't say it as saying one initially has to have every one of these qualities. I think one can have one or more and be moving in that direction, that their mind is such that they're irrevocably moving in that direction. But the original reason I raised my hand was where it talked about one who had unyoked themselves in the body and slipped the yoke of heaven. So I understand this to be, in this world, we have this physical body, and the mind, the chaita, is yoked to this body. Same thing in the heavenly world. You have a heavenly body, and you're yoked to that body. And these bodies have to be made out of something. Like this body has to be made out of the 4 great elements, physically speaking, the atoms and all that kind of stuff. When you go into the heavens, you still have to gather around a type of energy that corresponds to those same things, but it's more psychological and mental. And that's why Buddha doesn't mention the formless realm, because in the formless realm, the mind is just giving off more and more light, and that's why I say, oh, yeah, this light and this unlimited brilliance, and then, you get all those descriptions, right? And it's going out more and more and more, which is different because you're not yoking yourself to some other object, to manifest yourself in that realm. It's a more of an internal expansion of a body, and that's why he says that there are three types of bodies: the physical, the heavenly, and the formless body. But the formless body is kind of like self-mind generated, not mono-mind generated, which is this is mine, this is myself. I'm sorry, this I am, this is myself, which is different. You're pulling things together. Anyways, that's my point of view. Thank you for listening.
When we studied last year about the stream entry, we studied several practices and qualities which are the prerequisites of stream entry. And then, we studied, what happens at stream entry. And then there was a different list of qualities which are the characteristic of persons who have gained stream entry. So if you want to gain stream entry, it's not necessarily the most efficient way to start trying to get the characteristics of somebody who has stream entry. But instead, if you want stream entry, you would try to get the prerequisites for stream entry. And so perhaps similar to that, all of these qualities of the Brahmin, one who's attained it, which is, as Richard calls it, is covering quite a gamut of different kinds of things. It doesn't mean that these are the way to become a Brahmin, but instead these are the after effects. This is the result. This is what you see. This is what a person who is awakened is manifesting and giving back into the world, for which we may be grateful and appreciative. It certainly, I think, is useful to reflect on the qualities of enlightenment, even if we're sure that we don't yet have that level. But then reflecting about that, even reflecting about the qualities of the Buddha, that contemplation then becomes the inclination of the heart. So then you're inclined to go in that direction. And if you develop that inclination or that tendency, so you've got, instead of an unwholesome underlying tendency towards greed, hatred, or delusion, if you've got the wholesome underlying tendencies, and then if this is what you think and ponder on, what you contemplate on, what you manifest to some degree, and then if you manifest something that is participating in the qualities of a Brahmin or of an enlightened person. Let's say if there's some ants in the kitchen and you don't kill them, you even look with an idea of kindness towards those ants. Even it came up. We were having some conversation. Why are there so many ants in the kitchen all of a sudden? And somebody said, "Well, it's because there's so much intense rain outside. They're drowning outside, so they had to leave their nests because they were flooded out, and so that's why they came inside and became activated." And so even having such a thought like that, that's a thought, that's a sympathetic thought. So when we have a thought of non-harming, or a thought that's a sympathetic thought, a kindly thought, then we can recognize this is something that's in common with the heroes, the leaders, the Brahmins, The enlightened ones are kind. So when I'm being kind, I'm being kind like an enlightened person is kind. And so in that way, I feel that there is a lot that, a way that, what they say in Western psychology, they say that the subconscious can be trained, but the training is subconscious. So you don't know you learned something. You don't know that the subconscious has learned something. You don't know that the subconscious has been reprogrammed, because the subconscious, you can't see it, but it has been reprogrammed. And because it's been reprogrammed, then your tendencies are going in that different new direction. And that's when your practice can become calm, relaxed, the mind can be pliable, gentle, contented, open-minded, and ready to see reality just the way it is, without being distracted. Marajana, do you have any further things to tell us?
No, I thank you. That was I don't know anything about psychology, but I would say that's training perception.
Yeah.
It works on a more surface level.
Yeah. Okay. On all the levels.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, the best way to generate these good qualities is meditation. No? Yes. Meditation, which is samma samadhi, which is based on right view, right thought, right action, right effort, and right mindfulness. So the ideal meditation is grounded in the other points of the Noble Eightfold Path. But then in the end, meditation is the last factor of the Noble Path, because the other 7 factors are not enough by themselves. You can't get all the way there without meditation. So, which kind of meditation to practice? The insight meditation is partly practiced within this type of samma sati. And it should be like fully developed. And then tranquility meditation can be based on the breath or on contemplating an object like a kasina, which is just a fixed object to fix in your mind as a focus of concentration. Or it can be based on loving kindness and the Brahmaviharas. In the book that we're studying, Compassion and Emptiness, Bhante Analayo really has some things to say about practicing jhana meditation compared to practicing Brahmavihara meditation. He says that a lot of his American or Western students, when they try to practice jhana, they just become uptight and tense and blame themselves for not being able to get it, because they're like striving too hard and not having a sort of a harsh, unforgiving attitude towards themselves. But the metta meditation or the Brahmavihara meditation is more easier to obtain for many people, or for some people, or maybe it's easier for everybody. And the Brahmavihara meditation has some of the same benefits as the jhana meditation. So samma samadhi, or the last point of the Noble Eightfold Path, is usually defined as the 4 jhanas. And then in other places, the 4 immaterial meditations are also mentioned as part of the path. But I think to make a long answer short, I would say for a beginner, mindfulness meditation, and the breath meditation can be a kind of mindfulness meditation, or satipatthana meditation, and metta meditation is a very good starting point. When a person is accomplished in those kinds of meditations, they should try to find an opportunity and an occasion to be able to develop jhana meditation. Those are the 3 basic meditations. Ruwanti.
Hello, one sutta that came to my mind while listening to the sutta today is Vāseṭṭha Sutta, which I learned when I was little. And I remember this line very well in there. It said, Nachacha Vasalo Hoti, Nachacha Hoti Brahman. Kammana Vasalo Hoti, Kammana Hoti Brahman. What it says is, you are not a low life by birth, no, by birth you are a Brahmin. You are low life by your deed, by deeds you are a Brahmin. So I think one day Buddha was going on arms round, and Bharadwaja Brahmin called him low life. And then at that point, the Buddha asked the question, do you know how one becomes a Brahmin or low life? And then Buddha goes on to explain the other side of this, how one becomes low life by listing all the qualities, just like the sutta we did today. So I thought it's interesting to read the Vāseṭṭha Sutta side by side with the one that we discussed today. So I wanted to bring that up.
Good. And which book is that in?
It's in Sutta Nipata. I just looked it up. It's called Vāseṭṭha Sutta.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's close now so we can pay respect to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Aram Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhaṃ Bhagavantaṃ Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thank you, everyone, for your patient listening today.
Thank you, Ayya. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayya.